Welcome to the Cheating Wife Stories channel. I still have trouble wrapping my head around it sometimes. My soon-to-be ex-wife, Donna, and I are technically still married, but only because of the legal system. Where we live, you have to be separated for 12 months before you can actually get divorced, which honestly just feels like dragging out the inevitable at this point. During this so-called cooling-off period, she was supposed to find her own place nearby to make 50-50 custody of our 3 kids easier. Why are we getting divorced? Well, Dana's twin sister, Emily, came up with this brilliant idea that Dana should be their surrogate. Emily and her husband, Brian, have apparently been struggling to have kids. I get it. That is unfortunate for them. But instead of, using a regular surrogate or adoption, or literally any other option, they decided that because Emily and Dana are twins, Dana was the perfect choice to carry their baby. The worst part, I didn't even find out about this plan until way later. It turns out this had been in the works for weeks before I even caught a whiff of it. It wasn't like they sat down with me to have a proper conversation. No, that would have been too logical. Instead, Donna just casually mentioned it to me one night, as if it were no big deal. I remember exactly how it went down. We were sitting on the couch, and she just came out with it. "So I've been thinking about doing something really important for Emily," she said, scrolling on her phone like we were just talking about what to have for dinner. "Yeah," I glanced at her. "What kind of important thing?" Dana finally looked up. "I'm going to be her surrogate." At first, I thought she was joking. I let out a half laugh, waiting for the punchline. But she just kept looking at me as if she were expecting me to be happy about it. "Wait, what?" I sat up straighter. "Like you're going to carry their baby?" She nodded, smiling, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Yeah. I've been trying and Brian has been trying for so long. And since we're identical twins, it's practically like Emily's carrying her own child." My stomach sank. "Donna, are you serious? When did this even come up?" She shrugged. "A few weeks ago. We've been talking about it for a while." I stared at her, trying to process what I had just heard. "And you didn't think to mention it to me?" Donna sighed, setting her phone down. "Nathan, this isn't about you. It's my body, my choice. I don't need permission." "Permission? Dana, we were married. This is a huge decision, one that affects both of us. How could you not talk to me about this first?" She rolled her eyes. "I'm telling you now." "Oh, great. Now, after you've already made up your mind. That's not how marriage works." My expression hardened. "Look, I knew you'd react like this. That's why I waited. But this is happening. Nathan, whether you support me or not." I let out a breath, shaking my head. "So that's it. Either I get on board or what?" She crossed her arms. "Or maybe we should rethink things." And there it was. She ultimately made up her mind. She didn't say it outright, but the message was clear. Get on board or get out. I couldn't believe it. It wasn't just the surrogacy itself that bothered me, though. Yeah, that was a huge part of it. It was the fact that this had all been planned behind my back. Donna, Emily, and Brian had been scheming this whole thing for weeks, maybe even months, without even giving me a heads up. And now I was just supposed to be cool with it. I looked at her for a long moment. "If you go through with this, we're done." I laughed, but it wasn't out of amusement. "I'm being unreasonable. Dana, you're literally making a life-altering decision without even considering me. You don't think that's a problem?" She shook her head, exasperated. "I'm doing something beautiful for my sister. I thought you'd understand." I stood up, running a hand through my hair. "Yeah, well, I guess I don't." Fast forward a few months and guess what? She's pregnant. When Donna told me, I just nodded and said, "Okay," then walked out of the room. 2 days later, I filed for divorce. I had this drafted the same week that my wife told me about her plans. I just waited for her to act on them. Apparently, this shocked everyone. Dana acted like she didn't see it coming, which honestly blows my mind. Like, did she think I was bluffing? That I'd just magically get over it and be okay with my wife being pregnant by someone else's child? I told her exactly what would happen if she went through with this, and now she had the nerve to act surprised. Emily and Brian weren't any better. They tried guilt-tripping me into staying, throwing every cliché in the book at me. "You're abandoning your wife," Emily said, shaking her head as if I were some heartless monster. "She needs your support now more than ever." I let out a bitter laugh. "She's the one who made this choice, not me." Brian, always the diplomat, tried to soften the blow. "Nathan, this is a beautiful thing she's doing for us. Don't you see that?" "Oh, I see it," I said, crossing my arms. "I see that you two wanted a baby, and Dana decided to carry it without even talking to me first. That's not a marriage. That's not a partnership. That's just a decision she made. And now she gets to deal with the consequences." Emily's eyes narrowed. "You vowed to stand by her no matter what, and she vowed to respect me and not make life-changing decisions behind my back." I shot back. "So here we are." And that was it. I filed the paperwork, and the separation officially began. At first, Dana acted like she didn't care. She kept that same self-righteous attitude, as if she were above it all. "I don't need you," she said one night after I told her I was done discussing it. "I can handle this on my own." "Great," I said, "then do that." But as the months passed, reality started catching up to her. Suddenly, she wasn't as confident. She wasn't as in control. After I filed for divorce, the tension in the house became unbearable. Dana started acting as if nothing had changed, as if I was still supposed to care about her pregnancy or, worse, that I should be involved in it somehow. Meanwhile, I had already mentally checked out. Why would I invest energy into a pregnancy that wasn't mine? A pregnancy that was the exact reason we were splitting up. She didn't move out. Of course, finding a place in our area wasn't easy, especially not while pregnant. She kept saying she wanted to stay close for the kid's sake. But let's be real. It was more about convenience for her. Every time she needed something, she still expected me to act like her husband. One night, she walked into the living room where I was watching TV. "Nathan, can you run to the store for me?" I didn't even look away from the screen. "For what?" "Pickles, and maybe some ice cream." I let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, that's not my job anymore." She sighed as if I were being unreasonable. "Nathan, come on. It's just a quick trip." I finally turned to face her. "Donna, I'm not your husband anymore. Go ask Emily or Brian to do it." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she turned and walked away. As the weeks went on, she started dropping more and more hints about how hard everything was, how stressful it was, how much she had to do alone. At first, I just ignored her. I mean, what did she expect? That I was going to swoop in and save the day like I had during her previous pregnancies? Those were our kids. This was entirely her and her sister's decision. I didn't sign up for any of it. Eventually, the hints turned into outright complaints. "I don't know how I'm going to do this without you," she said one evening, rubbing her belly as if that would somehow make me care. I barely glanced up from my laptop. "Call Emily, call Brian." She let out a frustrated sigh. "It's not fair that I have to go through this alone." I closed my laptop and looked at her. "Fair? You really want to talk about fairness? Because I don't think it was fair to make this decision without me." But she didn't have an answer. She just pursed her lips and looked away. I kept telling her the same thing. Emily and Brian were the ones who wanted this baby. They were the ones who made all these promises about how amazing this surrogacy journey would be. Let them step up. But of course, they were nowhere to be found most of the time. Brian, in particular, seemed to be checking out of the whole situation. He showed up for the big events, doctor's appointments, the occasional baby-related errand, but day to day, he was missing in action. One night, out of pure curiosity, I asked Dana, "Where's Brian been lately? I thought he was supposed to be all in on this." He's been taking care of Emily, she said, shifting uncomfortably. She's still recovering from her car accident. Fair enough, I admitted. But it's not like he didn't know this baby was coming. Shouldn't he have planned for this? Dana's expression tightened. He's doing his best. He's under a lot of stress right now. I scoffed. Yeah, and you're not. She didn't answer, but that was enough for me. Brian's priorities had clearly shifted. He had an easy out, and he was taking it. Meanwhile, Dana was leaning harder and harder on me, as if I were somehow obligated to pick up the slack. She started asking for little favors, carrying groceries, setting up the crib, even rubbing her back when she was sore. Every single time, I shut her down. Nathan, can you help me with this? Nope. Not my child. Not my problem. One night, things finally came to a head. She was sitting on the couch, rubbing her belly and sighing dramatically, clearly trying to get my attention. I ignored her as long as I could, but eventually she spoke. You know, she said, her voice laced with irritation, you're still my husband. You could at least pretend to care. That was it. I snapped. No, I'm not your husband anymore. Not in any way that matters, I said, standing up. You made your choice when you decided to do this behind my back. Don't come to me now because you're realizing it's harder than you thought. Call Brian, call Emily, call literally anyone else, but leave me out of it. Her face crumpled, and just like that, the waterworks started. That had become her go-to reaction whenever things didn't go her way. But at this point, I was immune to it. I'm going to bed, I said flatly, walking away as she sat there sobbing on the couch. The next few weeks were more of the same. She kept trying to guilt me into helping, and I shut her down every time. It wasn't just about setting boundaries for myself, though that was a big part of it. It was also about principle. If I started helping now, even a little, Dana would take it as a sign that I was softening, and then I'd never be able to escape her demands. Things took another turn when the baby was born. I stayed out of it completely, didn't go to the hospital, didn't visit, nothing. I had told her ahead of time that I wouldn't be involved, so it wasn't like she didn't know. Still, she called me from the hospital, crying and begging me to come. Nathan, please, I don't want to do this alone. She sobbed into the phone. I'm scared. I kept my voice calm and firm. You decided to get pregnant by a man who was not your husband. That decision was made by you alone, so don't drag me in this. Brian put that baby in you. Better call him. He's not picking up. Then call Emily. Call your mother. This is their problem, not mine. You're being cruel. She whispered, her voice thick with tears. I sighed. No, Donna, I'm keeping my word. You knew where I stood before any of this happened. She didn't respond. And a second later, the line went dead. When she came home with the baby, that's when the real chaos started. It was as if she thought that bringing the baby into the house would magically make me care. Spoiler, it didn't. She started leaving baby things all over the place. Bottles in the kitchen, diapers on the couch, like some kind of psychological tactic to force me into acknowledging it. But I didn't bite. I just stepped over the mess and went about my day. At night, it was even worse. The baby would cry, and she'd come knocking on my door. Nathan, please, just this once. Can you help? She pleaded, her voice exhausted. No, I let out a frustrated huff. For goodness sake, it's 3 a.m. I haven't slept in days. Your baby, your problem. Now go deal with it. I didn't even get out of bed. Not my child, not my problem. There was a long silence, and then I heard her stomp off down the hall. The next day, she slammed cabinets and muttered under her breath about what a terrible person I was. I'll admit, there were moments when I felt a twinge of guilt, not because I thought I was wrong, but because the baby was innocent in all of this. It wasn't the child's fault that their parents were a mess. But at the same time, I knew that stepping in wouldn't actually help the situation. It would just enable Dana to keep relying on me instead of the people who actually wanted this baby in the first place. The final straw came when Donna outright demanded that I take a more active role. "You can't just pretend this isn't happening," she snapped one evening, standing in front of me with the baby in her arms. "It's not fair that I'm doing everything on my own." I barely looked up from my laptop. "Then call Brian," I said. "He's busy with Emily." I shrugged. "Not my child. Not my problem." Her eyes blazed. "You are so unbelievably selfish. You owe me this much." That got my attention. I set my laptop aside and met her glare head-on. "I don't owe you anything," I said flatly. "You are behaving as if I betrayed you," she screamed. I stood up and said, "I don't care if you were unfaithful or if you disrespected me by getting pregnant by another man. I warned you, and there will be consequences. You claimed it was your body, your choice. Now it is my life and my choice. This is your responsibility. Deal with it." That was it. That was the moment she finally broke. "You're a heartless monster," she spat. "One day you're going to regret this." She stormed off, and for a second I thought that was the end of it. But then, an hour later, she reappeared with a bag slung over her shoulder and the baby bundled in her arms. "I can't do this," she said, her voice shaking. "Not with you acting like this." I just nodded. She stared at me for a long moment, waiting as if she thought I might try to stop her. I didn't. 2 days later, Dana left with the baby. I thought, finally, this might actually be the break I need. I wasn't naive enough to believe she was gone for good. But for a couple of days, the house was quiet. No crying baby, no guilt trips, no arguments. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. But of course, nothing ever stays simple when Dana is involved. The calls started the next morning. First from her mom, then from her sister. The same sister who had masterminded this whole situation, and even her sister's husband. It was as if they had coordinated a campaign to wear me down. Every single one of them had the same talking points. Dana was overwhelmed. The baby was innocent, and I needed to step up for the sake of the family. Emily, her twin sister, was especially relentless. She left a long voicemail dripping with condescension. "I cannot believe how heartless you are, Nathan," she said sharply. "Donna just gave birth, and you abandoned her at the most vulnerable time of her life. Is this really who you are? Do you even have a soul?" I scoffed and deleted the message without responding. What was the point? This wasn't some surprise pregnancy that we had both signed up for. This was Dana's choice, a choice she made without consulting me, and a choice I explicitly told her I wouldn't support. Then there was Brian, the baby's biological father. He tried to play the sympathy card, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. "Man, things are really tough right now," he said over the phone. "Emily's still recovering from the accident, and Dana's struggling. We're all family, man. We should be supporting each other." I nearly laughed at the audacity. "Family," I repeated incredulously. "Are you joking? You barely lifted a finger during the pregnancy, and now you want to act like we're some kind of team. That's not fair," he protested. "I'm trying. Try harder." I cut him off. "This isn't my problem. Step up and take care of your own child." Then there was Dana's mom. She's usually pretty reasonable, but even she was on Dana's side this time. When she called, her voice was heavy with disappointment. "I just don't understand you, Nathan," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "Dana stopped being my wife the moment she decided to have another man's baby. If you care so much, maybe you should be the one helping her." There was silence, then a quiet click as she hung up. I think that's when it finally hit her. I wasn't going to cave. A couple of days later, Emily came back. I knew she eventually would, but I wasn't prepared for the scene she brought with her. She walked in as if she hadn't just called me every unkind name under the sun before storming out. The baby was strapped to her chest in one of those carriers. Her face was exhausted but defiant. "We need to talk," she said, standing in the middle of the living room as if about to give a lecture. I didn't even look up from what I was doing. As if she didn't already know what was going on, she gestured to the baby. You can't just ignore us forever. I'm not ignoring you, I said flatly. I've been very clear. This is your responsibility, not mine. That was all she needed to launch into another long-winded speech about how hard it was being a single mom, how unfair it was that she had to do everything on her own. She kept saying things like, "This isn't what I signed up for, and I never thought you'd turn your back on me like this." I sat there and let her talk. What was the point of arguing? She wasn't looking for a solution. She just wanted someone to blame. When she finally stopped, I met her gaze and said, "You signed up for this the moment you decided to carry their baby. Don't act as if this is my fault." That set her off. She started yelling, her face twisted in frustration. "You're being cruel, Nathan. You have no idea what I'm going through. Do you think this is easy for me? One day, you're going to regret this." I knew she would. The baby started crying, probably because she was yelling so loudly. She turned to me, snapping, "Are you just going to sit there? Do something." I shrugged. "Not my baby, not my problem." Her face turned red, and she stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door so hard it rattled the walls. The baby kept crying, but I didn't move. If she wanted to scream and slam doors, fine, but I wasn't about to let her dump her problems on me. That night, she tried a different tactic. Instead of yelling, she came into the kitchen while I was making dinner and acted as if everything were normal. She leaned against the counter, watching me cook, her voice softer and almost hesitant. "I miss the way things used to be," she said after a long silence. I kept chopping vegetables, not looking at her. "That makes one of us." She sighed and stepped closer. "I mean it, Nathan. I still love you. I want us to be a family again." I scoffed. "A family?" I turned to her, raising an eyebrow. "This was a family. You threw that away." She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. "I made a mistake." I set the knife down and crossed my arms. "Yeah, you did." She nodded and then took a shaky breath. "I'm sorry," she said, as if apologizing half-heartedly for how things had turned out, yet without taking any responsibility for her choices. I wasn't buying it. "That ship has sailed," I said flatly. "You made your decision. Now you have to live with it." She started crying again, her shoulders shaking as she choked out, "I don't want to get divorced. I can't do this on my own." I exhaled, already tired of the conversation. "You don't have to do it alone," I said. "You have Emily and Brian." But that wasn't what she wanted to hear. She didn't want their help. She wanted mine. She wanted me to swoop in and fix everything, just like I'd always done before. But not this time. I turned toward her and said, "You don't want a divorce, not because you love me. You got pregnant by a different man, despite my warnings. That tells me a lot about your love for me. You don't want a divorce because I give you a stable lifestyle. You just don't want to lose it. But take my advice. Get used to being alone. Get used to dealing with your mess by yourself. The divorce has been filed, and there will soon be a time when this lifestyle will be over." That night, when I went to bed, I could hear her crying in the next room. I didn't feel good about it, but I didn't feel bad either. I felt nothing. And that's when I knew for sure it was over. Whatever love or connection we'd once had was gone. She had burned it all to the ground with her choices. The next morning, she tried one last time. She came to me with dark circles under her eyes, looking desperate, the baby in her arms. "Please," she whispered in a raw voice, "just hold her for a little while so I can sleep. I haven't had more than 2 hours in days." For a second, I almost caved, but then I thought about everything that had led up to this moment. How she had lied, how she had betrayed my trust, how she had dragged me into a mess I never agreed to. "No," I said, my eyes widening. "What?" "Call Brian," I told her. "He's the father. He should be helping you." She looked as if I had struck her. Her lip trembled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You really dislike me that much, don't you?" I shook my head. "I don't dislike you," I said steadily. But I'm not going to let you guilt me into cleaning up your mess. This isn't my responsibility, and I'm done pretending it is. She left again after that. And this time, I think it might be for good. Her mom called me later, saying Donna was staying with her for now. I told her that was probably for the best. Maybe now, I could finally get some peace. 3 days after Dana left the second time, things settled down for a while. The house was quiet, sure, but it wasn't peaceful. There was this constant, nagging feeling that something else was coming, like the calm before a storm. And I wasn't wrong. About a week after she moved out, the letters and emails started coming. Dana's family, in full force, not just the usual guilt trips and emotional manipulation, but full-on arguments. It was as if they were trying to wear me down with sheer volume. Dana's mom wrote me a long letter about how I was being unreasonable, how family always comes first, and how I needed to step up. She went on about how hard things had been for Dana growing up, how much she had sacrificed, and how I owed it to her to support her now. I read it, sighed, and tossed it in the trash. What was I supposed to do with that? It wasn't like they were saying anything new. They had been portraying me as the bad guy from the start, and at this point, it was just noise. Emily and Brian, on the other hand, took a more direct approach. Brian showed up at my house unannounced one evening. When I opened the door and saw him standing there looking awkward, I knew this wasn't going to go well. "Hey man," he said, trying to sound casual, "can we talk?" I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "About what?" He shifted uncomfortably, as if debating whether to come in or turn around and leave. Finally, he sighed. "About the baby, about everything, really." I didn't move. "Say what you need to say." He looked surprised, as if he thought I'd actually invite him in. Not a chance. He started rambling about how hard things had been for him since Emily's accident, how he was trying to juggle everything, and how he really needed me to step up and help out. "For Dana's sake," he added. "For Dana's sake," I repeated sharply, my voice cutting him off. I saw him flinch. "This has nothing to do with me. That's your baby." Dana's sister agreed to this, knowing full well what it meant. "Why are you even here?" He looked flustered. "It's not just about the baby. It's about family. We're all connected in this." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "No, we're not." He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him continue. "You, Emily, and Dana decided all of this behind my back. You excluded me. And now you're acting as if I owe you something. Get real." He tried to argue, but I wasn't having it. "Leave," I said, stepping back into the house. "And don't come back unless you're ready to take full responsibility for your child." He didn't like that answer, but he didn't have much of a choice. He stood there for a moment, his jaw tightening, then muttered something about how I'd regret this before turning and walking away. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. Either way, it's not my problem, I thought. Meanwhile, Dana was still at her mom's. For a brief moment, I thought maybe she had started to figure things out. But no, she started using the kids as leverage. One night, she called and asked if she could come over to spend time with them. I said, sure, because they're still her children, and I wasn't going to keep them from her. But when she showed up, it was obvious she had an agenda. She spent the whole evening talking about how hard things were for her, how the baby kept her up all night, and how she just needed a little help to get back on her feet. Then she dropped the real bomb. She brought up the idea of moving back in, just until she could figure things out. I shut that down immediately. "No," I told her flatly, "you made your choice. You don't get to come back here and act as if nothing happened." She frowned, her eyes pleading. "Nathan, it's not just about me. The kids need their mother." "They do have their mother, Donna," I said. "But that doesn't mean I have to let you move back in." She exhaled sharply, clearly frustrated. "This isn't fair to them, to me. You're keeping our family apart." I scoffed. "No, you did that. You chose to blow up our marriage for your sister. You don't get to play the victim here." That was the first time I saw real anger in her eyes. Up until then, it had mostly been sadness, guilt, and frustration. But this was different. She looked at me as if I were the worst person on the planet. "You'll regret this one day," she hissed. "I promise you." Then she grabbed her stuff and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The weeks that followed were surprisingly uneventful. I settled into a routine with the kids, focusing on giving them as much stability as I could. They asked about their mom sometimes, why she wasn't living with us, why things were different. I kept my answer simple. "Mom and I are figuring things out," I would say. "But we both love you very much." It wasn't exactly a lie. I still loved my kids more than anything, and I knew Dana did too, in her own way. But that didn't change the fact that we were on completely different paths now. She had made her bed, and I wasn't about to climb into it with her. That said, I couldn't help but notice how much lighter I felt without her constant presence. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells or dealing with her drama. It was just me and the kids, figuring things out one day at a time. And honestly, it felt good. Then came the legal stuff. Divorce proceedings officially started, and that opened up a whole new kind of complications. Dana's lawyer tried to paint me as the unreasonable one, claiming I had abandoned her during a difficult time and refused to help with the baby. My lawyer countered with the facts. The baby wasn't mine. I had no obligation to help, and Dana had made the decision to go through with the surrogacy despite my objections. It was messy, but I wasn't worried. The truth was on my side, and I had plenty of documentation to back it up. Texts, emails, even voicemails. I had it all. Every piece of evidence showed that Dana knew exactly what she was doing, and that I had been clear about my boundaries from the start. Even with the truth on my side, it was exhausting. Every time I thought I was done dealing with her drama, something new would pop up. Her family kept reaching out, trying to guilt me into making things right. Even Emily and Brian tried to mediate, as if they had any right to tell me how to handle my life. I ignored them all. I had spent enough time cleaning up Dana's messes, and I wasn't about to start again. Through it all, one thing became crystal clear. I was done. Done with the guilt, done with the manipulation, done with the constant drama. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally in control of my own life again. And no matter how much Dana and her family tried to pull me back in, I wasn't going to let them. This was my chance to start over, to rebuild, and to focus on the things that really mattered. My kids, my own happiness, and a future where I wasn't constantly picking up the pieces of someone else's bad decisions. And for the first time in months, that future felt within reach. After weeks of back-and-forth drama, I finally got a taste of what my life might look like without Dana's constant chaos. It wasn't perfect. I was still figuring out how to balance work, being there for my kids, and the ongoing mess of the divorce. But at least it felt like things were finally heading the right direction. Dana stayed with her mom for the most part, which made things a lot less tense around the house. She still had her visitation days with the kids, and while I wanted to keep the peace for their sake, it wasn't always smooth sailing. During one of her visits, the kids came back talking about the baby. My youngest, wide-eyed and curious, looked up at me and asked, "Is the baby going to live with us someday?" I took a slow breath, choosing my words carefully. "No," I said gently, "the baby is staying with Aunt Emily and Uncle Brian." My oldest frowned. "But Mom said she had the baby. Doesn't that mean it's kind of like our little brother?" I rubbed the back of my neck. How do you explain surrogacy to kids? How do you make them understand that their mom's choices had nothing to do with them without badmouthing her? Mom helped bring the baby into the world, I explained calmly. But it's different from when she had you guys. This baby isn't coming to live with us. He's part of Aunt Emily and Uncle Brian's family. My oldest nodded slowly, clearly trying to act as if they understood, though I could see the gears turning in their head. My youngest, though, wasn't satisfied. "But why isn't the baby like us?" I hesitated, searching for a way to explain it in a way that made sense. Because sometimes grown-ups make choices that are different from what we expect. I said carefully, "But no matter what, you and your sibling are what's important to me." They didn't press further, but I could tell the conversation stuck with them. It stuck with me too, for days. Meanwhile, I had my own life to sort out. The divorce wasn't just emotionally draining. It was financially draining too. Dana's lawyer was pushing for spousal support, arguing that she couldn't work because of the baby. "She made this choice," I said exasperatedly, as I sat across from my lawyer in his office. "I didn't agree to any of this, and now she wants me to pay for it." My lawyer nodded, flipping through the paperwork. "That's what they're pushing for, but we have a strong case. The baby isn't yours. This was a surrogacy agreement she willingly entered into. She has her sister and brother-in-law for support." It felt like no matter how many times I set boundaries, Dana kept finding ways to try and pull me back in. She would call or text at random times, usually when she was in some kind of crisis, expecting me to drop everything and fix it. One afternoon, I was at work when my phone buzzed with an incoming call from her. I debated ignoring it, but something told me she'd just keep calling until I picked up. With a sigh, I answered. "What is it, Donna?" I asked, already bracing myself. She was crying. "Nathan, I don't know what to do. I can't afford daycare for the baby, and I have to start looking for work. I need you to help me out just a little, just until I get on my feet." I clenched my jaw. "Donna, the baby is not my responsibility. You have Emily and Brian for that. You made this choice. But they can't help me right now." She snapped, her voice thick with frustration. I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my patience. "No, Donna, what I understand is that you expect me to fix your problems when you don't like the consequences of your decisions. I'm not doing this anymore." There was silence on the other end, then a sharp, bitter laugh. "You really are heartless." Before I could respond further, she hung up on me. I stared at my phone for a second, shaking my head. 5 minutes later, another message popped up, this time from her mother. "I can't believe you would turn your back on the mother of your children. I always thought you were a decent man, but I guess I was wrong. How can you be so cruel?" I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Right on cue," I responded. "Even I was surprised when I came to know that your daughter is an extremely unpleasant person who would sacrifice her own children and family just to benefit from her brother-in-law. So stop talking about decency, and stop texting me." It later became a pattern. Whenever Donna hit a roadblock, instead of dealing with it herself or turning to Emily and Brian, she tried to drag me into it. At first, I would respond politely but firmly whenever Donna or her family reached out, trying to rope me into her problems. Over time, though, I realized there was no point. No matter how reasonably I explained myself, they would twist my words to make me out to be the bad guy. Eventually, I just stopped responding altogether. It wasn't my job to bail her out, and I wasn't going to let her guilt me into thinking otherwise. Despite everything, there were moments when I almost felt sorry for Dana. Every time I saw her, she looked more worn down, as if the weight of her choices was finally catching up to her. During one of our custody exchanges, she hesitated before speaking. "Can we talk privately for a minute?" she asked. I hesitated but nodded. "Yeah, sure." We stepped away from the kids, and she took a deep breath, not meeting my eyes. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for everything. I know I messed up, and I know I hurt you. I didn't know how to respond." Part of me wanted to tell her it was too late for apologies. Another part wanted to ask why she didn't consider the consequences before going through with all of this. In the end, I just nodded. "I hope things work out for you," I said simply. She looked as if she wanted to say more, but I didn't give her the chance. I wasn't interested in reopening old wounds. Whatever guilt or regret she was feeling was her burden to carry, not mine. The divorce was long, messy, and exhausting. But in the end, I got what mattered most: the kids, The court ruled in my favor, granting me full custody, with Dana receiving visitation rights. It was a relief, but not a victory. No one really wins in a situation like this. It was just the best outcome for my children. And that's all I ever wanted. Dana fought hard to paint herself as the victim. Her lawyer argued that she had made a selfless decision and only done what she thought was best. But the court wasn't blind to reality. They saw what I had seen all along, that Dana was unreliable, that she made choices without considering the consequences, and that she tried to use our kids as leverage to get what she wanted. I sat in that courtroom, listening to her attorney talk about how difficult things had been for her, how much she loved the children, and how she deserved shared custody. I'll admit, there was a small part of me that wondered if the judge would buy into it. But then my lawyer stood up and laid everything out. The instability, the broken promises, the times Dana had prioritized herself over our kids. The evidence spoke for itself. When the judge made the final ruling, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Full custody. Dana would get scheduled visitation, but I would be the one making the decisions, providing stability, and giving them the home they needed. I glanced over at her, and for a moment, she looked like she was about to cry. Maybe she had convinced herself the court would side with her, but reality had finally caught up to her. Afterwards, she tried to talk to me in the hallway outside the courtroom. "I don't want things to be like this," she said, her voice shaky. "I still want to be in their lives." "That's up to you," I told her, keeping my tone even. "But I won't let them be dragged into chaos. If you show up for them, great. If not, I'll make sure they're okay either way." She nodded, wiping her eyes, but I didn't stick around. There was nothing left to say. Now it's just me and the kids, figuring things out day by day. There are challenges, sure. Single parenting isn't easy, but for the first time in a long time, our home feels steady and peaceful, and that's worth everything I had to go through.